I wish it was super easy. I wish you could just be like barreling along, eating your bacon and cheese and just enjoying life and then being like, boom, I want to have some carbohydrates. Let's go ahead and just immediately have some rice cakes, some Lucky Charms, and just a bunch of other delicious stuff. Well, that is not how carb cycling works. That is not how cyclical ketogenic dieting works. You have to really pay attention to a few rules. So I've got 5 very important rules that are rooted in science when it comes down to cycling on and off of keto. So let's dive into it. Rule number 1, when you are first coming off of keto and introducing carbohydrates, you need to try to back off the fats for a little bit. Okay, remember, your cells are going to be very efficient at utilizing fat, and that is so unbelievably epically cool while you are on keto. But it's not exactly cool while you're on carbs. Why? Because your cells preferentially gonna use one fuel source or the other. Okay, they'll use both, but they'll prefer one. And if you are giving it fat all the time on keto, then it's going to continue to want fat, okay? So you need to kind of cut the fat down a little bit while you increase the carbs so that preferentially your body has no choice but to start adapting to carbohydrates. The last thing you really want while you are off of keto is for your body to still be seeking ketones, because that means it's not using glucose and the carbs you are consuming are just contributing to higher levels of blood glucose. We need to give your body a little bit of space and let it do its job. So cut the fat intake down a little bit, increase protein by about 50%, and go ahead and enjoy the carbohydrates and let them do their job for a little bit. Okay, the second piece is super important. It has to do with sort of stabilizing our gut. And I know that the whole gut thing is just embryonic. We don't know a whole lot about it and it's boring to talk about, but this is so important because there's a lot of research here. Okay. So studies have demonstrated that while you're doing a ketogenic diet, it takes about 6 months to really get a huge improvement in the gut just diversity. Like at first when you go on keto, you actually destabilize the gut. You have a degree of gut dysbiosis for the first 2 weeks. And then after that, things get better and better. It's like an inflammatory response kind of thing. So when you are coming off of keto, you might find that you have a good degree of gut dysbiosis because you're going from one world to a completely different world. So let's say, for example, you have a bunch of bacteria that are in your gut related to keto, and then all of a sudden you switch over and you give yourself a bunch of different carbohydrates. All of a sudden you have a whole different slew of bacteria that are like, whoa, carbohydrates, they feed on bacteria and they grow. Then you have this dysbiosis. So it's very important that you consume a good amount of soluble fiber while you are transitioning. Okay, so soluble fibers, things like flax, things like chia, things even like if you wanted to get some of the beta glucans that you might find in like oatmeal, make sure you get gluten-free oatmeal. I'm not the biggest fan of grains and oats, but you know, whatever. In this case, a little bit of that so you get that soluble fiber. Get a good stabilization and balance of your gut bacteria the best that you can. Take a good probiotic. The one that I recommend is called Seed. It's down below in the description. Put a link down there as well. You can use code Thomas15 and save 15% off. Very interesting company that's paving the way in a lot of like microbiome research too. They're a big supporter of this channel, so I just want to give them a big shout out and make sure that you know that they are definitely my go-to for probiotics and prebiotics. So that link is down below in the description. If you're going to think about cycling on and off keto, I would highly, highly, highly recommend Seed. So that link is down below, and big thank you again to them for the continued support on this channel. The third thing that's very important is when you cycle on and off keto, you may want to consider doing what's called alternate day fasting during your carb phases. Now, the reason that I recommend this is you've worked really hard to achieve fat adaptation during keto. Maybe you weren't seeking that out deliberately. Maybe that wasn't your goal to get quote unquote fat adapted, but it's happened. Doing keto has allowed your cells to become very efficient at using fat, which comes with like a ridiculous amount of benefits. We don't want to lose that and throw it completely away when we go on carbohydrates. So what I would recommend you do is alternate day fast, where every other day you do a minimum 16-hour fast, and that allows your body to at least maintain some metabolic flexibility and still desire fats in the appropriate time. Okay, so when you're fasting, your body's going to have no choice but to use fats because there's no dietary glucose coming in. Then when you do give it food, you do give it fuel, sure, then it has glucose. So that way it's really having a clear line of delineation between when it should use fats and when it should use carbs. So alternate day fasting just provides an easy entry into doing that. Okay, the fourth thing that I really think is important is during the first 2 weeks of transition, coming off of keto and adding carbs in, try to do a lot more high intensity interval training. What this is going to do is it's going to force your body to have to use carbohydrates efficiently. So there's an adaptation period with whether you go keto or whether you go off keto. It takes a while for your cells to be like, oh, this is the new fuel I need to use. This is the new normal. Well, you can shove new normal in its face a little bit faster if you expedite it and move it. So in other words, glucose, your body's going to start using it. But if you intensely exercise, then you're like forcing glucose in there and it's forced to adapt faster. So 2 weeks of doing HIIT is going to allow you to just really upregulate that. So I would recommend 4 days per week when you're transitioning of doing HIIT. And the cool thing is after a few days, you're going to notice you actually improve your performance with HIIT and you'll get kind of addicted to it. It feels kind of good. And then I would recommend that you do at least 2 to 3 days maintaining HIIT throughout the entirety of whenever you are having those carbohydrates during this phase. This is a very important piece and allows you to adapt quicker so you're not remaining glucose intolerant during this transition piece. And this one is exceptionally important. It's number 5, and I hope you haven't clicked off the video yet because it has to do with your snacking and insulin levels. Studies have demonstrated, or relatively new, actually brand new, 2021 study had showed that when you come off of keto or when you're exposed to carbohydrates, it can take twice as long for your insulin levels to come back to baseline than someone that has been having carbs regularly. So in other words, when you come back to carbohydrates, your insulin levels are not going to stabilize as fast. In order for you to burn fat and have the success you want, you need your insulin levels to come back to baseline as fast as possible. Because when insulin levels are low, glucagon is high, and that allows you to activate hormone-sensitive lipase and other fat-burning properties. So because it takes twice as long for insulin to come back down for the first week or two, you need to be very critical about not snacking in between meals because every time you do snack with some carbohydrates, it's going to bring insulin up and then it's going to take twice as long for it to come down as it would if you're used to using carbs. So keep it very clear and defined with the meals that you are eating. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, whatever, just very defined with no grazing in between, at least for a 10 to 14 day period. I hope that this clears some things up and allows you a successful transition into the cyclical ketogenic diet. I will see you tomorrow.